Hello, everybody. It is a great pleasure to be here with you today and support Latino justice. I was honored in 2017 by this wonderful organization with the award of Latina Trailblazer and remain fully committed to diversity and inclusion initiatives and pro bono work. Diversity and inclusion must be an essential part of corporate policies of all industries and not mere abstract social objectives. At Wilkie, we have made tremendous efforts to embrace diversity and inclusion, reflecting our strong belief that everyone benefits from a more rewarding and productive work environment, and that the confluence of people of different gender identities, sexual orientations, ethnicities, races, cultures, and religions make us a better firm. During these challenging times, it is more than ever fundamental for all of us to support our Latino Justice Familia. Let's connect, build, and transcend together. Let's have this program start. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Maria Leticia, for your kind welcome and for Wilkie's generous support of our work. And many thanks to our other sponsors tonight, which in addition to Wilkie Farr include Aiken Gump, Arnold and Porter, Cadwalader, and Southwest Airlines, all of whom have provided generous support to this event and support our work throughout the year. On behalf of the Latino Justice Board of Directors, I thank you all for joining us this evening at our annual President's Address. As many of you know, the President's Address is one of the high points of the Latino Justice calendar. Today, you will hear from our President and General Counsel, Juan Cartagena, about the organization's 2021 priorities. Needless to say, 2020 was a challenging and difficult year for Latino justice, as it has been for the communities we serve. Juan and the staff had to quickly pivot and overhaul the way we carried out our work in the midst of a pandemic. But knowing that our community has been amongst the hardest hit only increased our resolve to continue to work without skipping a beat, as this has only made us stronger and more determined. Over the last year, Latino Justice's work has not only deepened, but it has become more widely recognized by allies and supporters. And of course, we look forward to connecting with all of you as we move on towards our greatest milestone, which will be our 50th anniversary in 2022. And before I go, I would also like to thank the Latino Justice Líderes, our extremely hardworking and engaged junior board, for helping to organize and host this event. We are very fortunate indeed to have their energy and commitment at making events like this a success and in the overall promotion of Latino justice. Finally, please welcome Deanna Clugston, Líderes member and associate at Wilkie Farr & Gallagher, who will introduce Juan Cartagena. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose, and hello. On behalf of the Latino Justice Líderes Board, welcome to the Latino Justice PearlDeaf 2021 President's Address. Thank you for joining us today. The Líderes Board is a group of young professionals that serve as ambassadors to Latino justice. We host various events throughout the year and help elevate the organization's mission. We hope that you will also join us for the winter panel in March, and we will be sending out information on our spring networking reception as well. So please be on the lookout. To put it simply, the work Latino justice does is critical. From criminal justice reform to immigrant and voting rights, I am both humbled and inspired by the LJP team members, members of the board of directors, and my co-leaders. Now, it is my great honor to introduce Latino Justice President and General Counsel, Juan Cartagena.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And saludos and buenas tardes. Greetings and good afternoon to all of you who are listening. It really is my honor to give these remarks to you and to the circle of supporters of Latino Justice PearlDeaf. We thank our sponsors, all of them, of course, and our Leaders Board for helping to arrange this event today. And also our host, the law firm of Wilkie, Farr and Gallagher. Glad to hear that lawyers at Wilkie are working with our staff to address some matters in litigation. So a recognition of that kind of work from Bia Williams-Keeval, Erica Kerman, and Lorena Garcia Perez Gavilan. Thank you all for the work with our staff. So, hey, this has been an incredible time to be in the United States, and an incredible time to be a global citizen as well. 2020 seems like it's still with us. Hard to believe that it's still the case, given the fact that 2020 was such a hard year for so many people. An incredible year, a historic year, but a year that brought a lot of pain, a lot of mourning. And the fact that it took a new president to actually recognize that mourning of loss of life in the United States, over 400,000 people, is something that still moves me. For all of you who've lost people, friends, family members, we share your pain, and we know what that is. 2020 was with us. It's not just the pandemic, but the polarization in our country, the inability to forge a path forward to address not only the pandemic, but the fact that we were entering a major year, the census count in 2020, the national elections, and the episodes that we had to go through as a country when the national election results were challenged. And then when it became obvious that there was no evidence to dispute it, it was still being challenged. And those things still resonate with us in 2021, as we all know, given the recent events in January and the insurrection on January 6th. LatinoJustice also entered 2021 with news that was very, very hard for us to take. And that was the resignation of one of our staff members, Senior Counsel Natasha Banan. I want to say this at the very top of the hour, and the fact of the matter is we are still hurting. We still are doing our best to process this information. Appropriation of culture and identity can never be countenanced by an organization, by any organization, including ours. But the fact is that Natasha's resignation, which came at the right time, and because, as she said, to minimize distraction, was an important development in this episode. We have done everything already to ensure that her cases have been transferred to other attorneys, and I'm still meeting with coalitions for which she worked to address these issues and to listen to how they want to express their frustrations and their pain. So for that, we're ready to move forward. Thank you. Now in 2021, the year that precedes actually our 50th anniversary of LatinoJustice, our 50th anniversary that we celebrated long and hard, because we do celebrations right at LatinoJustice. In 2022, we will have reached that milestone year of 50 years. It's an amazing accomplishment for what started out as a vision of 3 attorneys, Cesar, Agosto, Perales, Jorge Batista, and Victor Marrero in 1972. So we'll be keeping you posted on all those developments for next year. But now we have to, in this year, work hard to connect, work hard to build, and work hard to transcend. We are optimistic, and we have to be, and we should be. Despite all these challenges, we have optimism in our organization. We're optimistic because we are aligned as a staff, as a board, and as our young leaders board in all of our work. We're optimistic because we're on solid financial position this year. And that's due to the fact that a number of foundations stepped up in ways that were unforeseen at the beginning of the year. Organizations and foundations like the Wellspring Foundation, like New York Life Foundation, Vanguard Foundation, the Ford Foundation, a perennial partner of ours, the law firm of Nixon Peabody, which I'll talk about in a minute, Mackenzie Scott and an unexpected gift, the Heisen Simons Foundation, and the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation all stepped up and gave us additional support this year and puts us in a very, very solid footing. But we're also optimistic because at the end of the day, and you who know us well, know this very well, because we do righteous work at LatinoJustice. We work to make sure that arc that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about, that arc continues to bend towards justice. Right now, among our pillars of our work, I want to start with democracy building. The fact of the matter is that our democracy is currently in peril. It was always fragile, but it was really shown to be fragile in 2020. It is something that we consistently have to work towards to make sure it's supported and elevated and given a chance to all of us to recognize what we do and to create stakeholders and the voice of stakeholders going forward. You know, Latinx organizers throughout the United States pushed for record turnout and were able to achieve record turnout of Latinx voters throughout the country, and particularly in places like Arizona and Georgia. And in Georgia, we work from the Southeast Regional Office in Orlando, and that staff there did a lot of work in Georgia, both during the general election in November and during a special runoff election in January. And to them, we give a lot of credit to making sure that every vote was cast and counted. Our democracy is in peril because of these events and the events that are being led by certain factions of the Republican Party, not all, obviously, but certain. And just we are concerned about what that means to be ready for the next round of our challenges in democracy building. And that has to do with redistricting. In this year, 2021, we'll finally get the census data, and that just jumpstarts a very fast-paced race towards creating new district lines with congressional districts and then state senate, state assembly, and eventually down the line, county legislative bodies and municipal legislative bodies. We've done this work before and we're ready to do it again. And in this year, 2021, we'll be ready as well. We've already laid the groundwork for redistricting work and planning in these states and many others, especially the ones that are here in the Northeast. And yet our census and our apportionment issues are still in play. The previous administration would challenge and still plans to challenge whether or not persons are persons. Think about that for a second. Whether or not the word persons in the Constitution actually means what it says, persons, as opposed to persons being only the eligible voters or only registered voters. And those attacks have to happen at the federal level. And it's quite certain to me that this new administration will do everything to avoid it. But even if this federal administration stops that inanity of refusing to acknowledge that everyone in this country who lives and breathes and supports and pays taxes should have a voice, this will also be a challenge at the state level. And for that, we have to be ready at LatinoJustice. Redistricting also questions whether what we call majority and minority districts are still possible, or in many cases still necessary for emerging communities of Latino and emerging communities of Asian relations in this country. Without a majority district that they can actually control, it's going to be very difficult for them to elect candidates of their choice. But that's also going to be in play. Redistricting in 2021 will also start to question that perennial issue of prison gerrymandering, that obscene policy that people who are imprisoned in cages throughout the United States are counted as residents of their prison towns, as opposed to being counted as residents of their home districts for legislative reapportionment and legislative redistricting. We've been able to address that both in litigation and in legislation in New York, but we still have to address these issues in places like Florida or Georgia and other southern states that we work in. Redistricting also starts to question the requirement for what's called racially polarized voting evidence. This is evidence that demonstrates that Latinos are cohesively a voting bloc. So I can easily see what you're thinking, and that is in the 2020 elections, there were divisions within the Latino community in terms of its preferences for the national election. Divisions that have been with us for a long time, but seem to be discussed this time as if they're brand new. They're not. Latino voters are not a monolith, and the Latino community is not a monolith. The real bottom line question is, how do we ensure that people have access to the vote to express these opinions? And how do we ensure they start to express these opinions in a way that's constructive for all Latinas and Latinos in this country? So can we imagine a democracy that it has all this inclusiveness? Can we imagine something as broad base and its tent that includes all our stakeholders, the voices of all our stakeholders. Can we imagine a democracy that dismantles the actual structures and systems that empower states over voters, like the Electoral College? I think we have imagined that, and I think we must. But let's recognize as well that this question of both the pandemic and this recession that we're in also is a major challenge to the work of LatinoJustice, because it's a major challenge to our gente who are workers. All of our workers. The workers who are currently employed, but yet still don't have access to work from home, or the privilege of working from home. The workers that are unemployed, recently unemployed, and are still looking for work. And the workers who just gave up looking for work because they have been unemployed for such a long time. That last category of workers is not counted in our unemployment data. Individuals who've been chronically out of work have looked and looked and can't find. We learned one thing in 2020, and that is that Latinx workers at the front lines of all of these touch points with the community and with the outside world. And Latino and Latina workers at these front lines doing the work in hospitals, and doing the work in construction, and doing the work in transportation, and doing the work in healthcare, and doing the work for childcare, and doing the work in all of these areas. Somehow they got promoted last year, promoted to become essential workers, the jargon that we've used in this country. But we have to recognize as well, did very little to either increase their salary, still not even a living wage in so many parts of the country, but also does very little now with prioritization for the vaccine. In other workers in 2020, but demoted on the line for waiting for that vaccine. As with all essential work that kept the United States economy from completely collapsing, we have to really start valuing again what it means in this country to do manual work and work that is necessary. And what it means that wealth gap between the rich and the poor is just growing every year. COVID disproportionately affected people of color. And that's because of the deep racial inequities in our healthcare system. COVID exacerbated those inequities. Take, for example, what we just learned in New Jersey. New Jersey's population, all Latinx people, is 18%. But 26% of all COVID cases in New Jersey come from Latinx individuals. And yet they only got 5% of the vaccines to date. This is just one example. Next, we must provide economic relief to all workers in this recession. Direct payments to them. We understand the Biden administration is working towards that, but that's a very essential element of our work. And because low-wage workers were especially hit by this recession and by the pandemic. That means women workers, and people of color workers. Low-wage workers are also very hardest hit in this recession, and unionization will actually help. Unionization provides an opportunity to provide benefits to workers, provides bargaining power when it comes to negotiations with large industries. Collective action protects these workers, and unionization should also protect these workers and help out with a labor movement that has to increasingly address the needs of workers of color. This unemployment will be the legacy of the COVID pandemic, among many other legacies. New jobs, where would they surge from? Well, they also would be created by public works investments. And they will also be created by our work on climate change. Public sector work is the future. Green jobs are the future. I was just reminded by our organization UPROS in Brooklyn that does incredible work on climate change and environmental justice. And they started applauding recently the fact that New York State has just put out a solicitation bid to create the largest offshore wind energy apparatus in the entire country. And that for the first time, there's a solar energy cooperative that was created for New York State. All of these jobs can be new and can help in addressing the recession that we have. At LatinoJustice, we're making sure that those workers, all workers, are treated fairly, equitably, and that they're working in safe environments. Our next area of work has a lot to do with where we stand as a country in terms of the racial polarization that exists. The fact that we were reminded one more time that we have to do everything possible in support of Black lives, positions that we have taken consistently in Latino justice. We recognize the harms that our Black brothers and sisters have faced in this country for centuries. We recognize the harms that our own Black sisters and brothers who are Afro-Latino, Afro-Boricua, Afro-Dominican, Afro-Colombiano, all of them also suffer. And as a result of those questions, we have been front and center in the movement to support Black lives. We also recognize that at this time, the polarization in this country has increased, the incidence of hate crime. And that is likely not going to go away in the short term, regardless of the Biden administration. We have to be ready to address this. White supremacist groups, militia groups are intent to using fear and intimidation and arms to make their points. And we have to make sure that all government addresses the prevalence of hate crimes and is prepared to do something about it. You may have read that Puerto Rico has taken some steps in this regard, initial steps to deal with gender violence. And we applaud those steps. We also recognize that Puerto Rico has a lot more to do. But these are the issues that we address every day in our communities, in our Latino justice. The next issue with respect to our work on criminal justice reform, drug policy reform, and policing reform is a very simple premise. No one is disposable. A simple premise that recognizes that restorative justice principles can guide all of our work, can look to a bloated system of arrests, cages, criminal courts, and criminal prosecution in a way that allows us to start thinking about diverting funding in a way that makes sense for a bloated system that continues to harm. Our leading work, for example, in our office in Texas, to try to make sure that individuals who are imprisoned during this COVID pandemic are given a fair chance to be released early if necessary, released because they were never sentenced to death. And in that kind of work that has been spearheaded by our staff down there in Texas, and in that kind of work, we cannot accept distinctions between individuals convicted of violent crimes and individuals convicted of nonviolent crimes. No one was sentenced to death. It should be sentenced to death because of the pandemic. And we have to make sure that we are prepared to apply all these issues equally across the board. That work continues in Texas, and of course needs to be continued everywhere else. But as I told you before, I was dreaming with respect to a democracy that's inclusive. I now want you to take with me for 1 minute to dream about a different set of safety, a different environment for public safety, a different environment when it comes to how do we deal with transgressions of norms, and sometimes transgressions that create harm and cause harm. You see, we know it is not going to be a surprise to any one of us when another episode, another individual, another ser humano will be lost in terms of police abuse of force in this country. It's happened multiple times since 2021, and it's likely to happen again. We can address that in many ways, but it still is an issue of how do we change, what does it take to change and reduce the interactions between police and our communities. To address those issues requires us to define our collective Black and Brown experiences with law enforcement going forward. So all the efforts to de-escalate, like recent efforts in New Jersey, are fine. All the efforts to reject the distinction between violent versus non-violent crimes as a way to stop the war on drugs are fine. And all the efforts that we get to address the prison industrial complex, an incredible report by our colleagues at Worth Rises the prison industry report. Read it. And those efforts and recommendations are also incredibly good, incredibly strong, and they're fine. But imagine with me for a second, a safer, more just, police-free community. Imagine for me for a second, interrupting criminalization. Read about how Mariam Kaba talks about these issues. It's a vision, it's a place to go. There are many steps to take along the way, but we have to start thinking things differently, if only to address the harm that's been created for so many years in our community. Recently, we also just got involved by producing an amicus brief in a case called People versus Caldenas before the Supreme Court of California. And the brief addressed the issue of how gang affiliation is being used as an enhancement towards the imposition of the death penalty. Our concern about that is multiple. We have consistently opposed the death penalty as an organization going back to the 1980s and when I was first here as a staff attorney. And we know those issues are very important. We go forward as best we can to ensure that the systems that we address are challenged every step of the way in order to make sure that equitable principles also win out. When it comes to our immigration work, one message is also clear. No human is illegal. You know, free market economics, which rules the way economic policies have been dictated in this country for well over a century, close to or more, and across the world. Free market economics, of course, are going to require mass migrations just to ensure a steady supply of cheap labor. It shouldn't surprise us that these mass migrations come to different industrialized countries because they're lured here by the need of large industries like agribusiness or construction. Those things are pretty clear. And that's a driving force. Put aside the fact that individuals who reach our border, our southern border, because they're escaping harm, violence, and intimidation. Those are the ones who are coming to the border for humane reasons. But many others are lured here because the economics are such that such steady supply of cheap labor is necessary. In this week, we heard that the Biden administration wants to start talking about full comprehensive reform. About 60% of all undocumented people in the United States, according to some statistics, have lived here for more than 10 years. They make up about 5% of the population, 5% of the workforce population. And about 40% of them did not cross the border. They just overstayed their visas and stayed here without status. Of the estimated 11 million undocumented people in the US, they have had 4 million, estimated 4 million US citizen-born children, creating mixed families throughout every undocumented household. The Biden bill, if it's going to go anywhere, we have to insist that it's not just window dressing. But in the likelihood that it's not going to go anywhere, given the polarization in Washington, the hyper-partisan polarization in Washington, then we're going to have to address the fact that something less than full, comprehensive immigration reform, whatever that's supposed to mean, has to be addressed. What is it that we can do to ensure that people have access to the tools to work? Driver's licenses, work authorization. What is it that we can do to ensure that they have health care, regardless of the status, in order to keep their jobs? How do we ensure that DACA gets preserved and that DAPA gets extended as well and become a reality? That's what I want you to imagine. A place in which we don't have full reform, we have substantive reform that addresses the needs of people who are undocumented. In this case, we want to interrupt the criminalization of Latinx presence. Let's interrupt the criminalization of Latinx presence. I mean, Joaquin Castro went there. We remember him saying that on the debate stage in 2019. repealing sections 1325 and 1326, shutting down Operation Streamline, shutting down ICE from its worst aspects of enforcement, excessive policing enforcement, are issues that we all have to debate and espouse, because we want to imagine an America in which the criminalization of presence is no longer a reality for so many people. Racial profiling are matters that we can try to curb, and we have in LatinoJustice through litigation. It will not be completely eliminated, but we can try to curb it. For those of you right now, I'd like to show you a 2-minute video clip of the incredible work that LatinoJustice has done in a case out of Maryland with the direct assistance of our pro bono co-counsel, Nixon Peabody.
This is pretty complicated legally, but the short version is that Sheriff Jenkins established a policy that required his deputies to detain individuals based on civil immigration warrants. As a result, the violation of Roxana's rights was caused by a local mandate rather than a partnership with ICE. We argued that the county should be held responsible because the sheriff enacted the policy on behalf of the county.
After remand from the Fourth Circuit, we moved for summary judgment, which the court granted. So we began a mediation process before the federal magistrate judge, and there were 3 important elements of the settlement.
Roxana is one of the bravest, most courageous individuals that I've ever met. She decided to stand up and be a voice for others in the Latino community who were similarly being racially profiled and arrested and detained and turned over to immigration. She knew there was a possibility that ICE could and would retaliate against her, but nonetheless she agreed to be a plaintiff in our lawsuit.
Yo era ¿cómo decirle? Yo era como un espejo para todos los inmigrantes, porque yo he tenido el valor de seguir el caso. Yo le dije, no, yo no es que tengo valor, a mí me dieron el valor. Después fue donde ustedes vinieron de la justicia de LatinoJustice, y yo sentí más apoyo para mí. Es lo que me conmovió a seguir adelante.
One of the things that made Roxana's case so difficult is that it was a novel area of law that wasn't very well developed at the time. We were arguing general constitutional principles that hadn't really been applied to local enforcement of federal immigration law. We were able to push the envelope of the law a little bit forward, and in the process, we secured some important changes to the policies and practices of Frederick County.
Whenever we read or I see that decision, Roxana's case being cited, it brings a smile to my face, knowing that the work that Nixon Peabody and LatinoJustice did in this case
in
will
our
have a
office,
lasting
the
impact
case
and
of
affect the lives of many other immigrants around
Orellana
the
Santos
country.
is super important. It provided precedent-setting law in a very unique area at the time that it was decided by the Fourth Circuit. Local police cannot profile individuals based on suspected immigration violations. And as a result, we've been very successful. Many thanks to our partners at Nixon Peabody. I also want to just segue with respect to the firm of Nixon Peabody, because they've also been instrumental in ensuring that we also address that pipeline, that law school pipeline that will give so many opportunities to incredible students, Latinas and Latinos, Latinx students across the country who look to LatinoJustice as a place for support for their dreams of becoming leaders in civil rights, and for many of them of becoming attorneys. And the Nixon Peabody sponsorship of our CAP Institute work in so many levels. It's a 10-year partnership with Nixon Peabody that they were generous enough to help co-sponsor and really push with respect to this pipeline. So we're going to do everything possible to continue to work on that pipeline. It's an area that we still have a lot of work to do. The number of Latino lawyers is meager compared to other professions in the United States, with higher inclusion of Latinos and Latinas. But our work continues. You know, our current board of directors, mentors, members of our young leaders this board, and our leaders board members in turn mentor college and sometimes even high school students who are interested in the career in law. And they do so through the Next Generation Leaders program. But the fact that our board is actually reaching out to our younger professionals is an incredible testament to this pipeline work that started from the moment we opened our doors in 1972. Our law interns, our legal fellows consistently cite us, LatinoJustice, as incubators of their work in social justice and racial justice work. It's a testament to the lawyers on staff who helped mentor them when they were here as legal interns. I should know because I was a legal intern here once, many, many, many years ago. The fact of the matter is that we're looking at this pipeline in very important ways. We need Latinx lawyers and Latinx champions willing to lead on the issue of racial justice today, willing to step forward and go ahead and help this country address these racial justice issues, willing to step forward and help a community that's such a vital part of the United States. Well over 60 million Latinx people live in the United States. Add another 3 million if you add Puerto Rico. And these groups are just growing and growing. It is the future of the country. And the fact that you have supported us for so many years is very important. But as I speak about these issues of nurturing a new leadership, a growing younger leadership, nurturing these leadership skills and nurturing this new generation of people, then I also have to share with you that I'm prepared to do so as well. I want to announce to you that I've already started making my plans for a transition from LatinoJustice Pearl Deaf. I announced to my staff in October of last year, the full staff, announced to our board of directors even earlier than that, that sometime in 2021, very likely in the early summer of 2021, I'll be making a transition out of LatinoJustice. In April of 2021, I would have reached 10 years as president and general counsel, a position that has been an honor for me, a real honor. 2021 is also my 40th anniversary of practicing law. I'm looking forward to what the new challenges for me will make. But I'm also looking forward to the fact that I want to make room for new leadership. I want to nurture and help in any way that new leader can or would invite me to do, because he or she will take on an incredible organization. He or she will actually lead an organization in very good position. It's almost like the perfect time for leadership change. And this is, for me, a wonderful place to announce this, because of you all of you, so many of you have come to this event in previous years, and I wish I was there personally with you to share this news face-to-face, live, and to hear what I hope would be a commitment to help the organization and continue to support the organization going forward. We will address these issues in 2021 because our work is super important. It's work that will help us connect, it's help us build, and help us transcend. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. I understand that if there's a opportunity to address questions through the chat, whether you're watching on social media or watching directly in Zoom, this is apparently the time. So I will take my direction from the individuals backstage to address any questions you may have. Thank you so much. I'm still waiting. Can somebody just let me know whether or not there's any in the queue, any questions in the queue? Otherwise, we'll start to the breakouts. Okay, so hearing none, all the issues that I just raised in my conversation with you today are going to be elaborated upon in our breakout sessions. I want you to please take advantage. You'll get a chance to talk to staff in each one of our pillars of immigrants' rights and voting rights, our CAP leadership work, our work on criminal justice, and our work on economic justice. Throughout it all, some of our individuals can also speak about how some of those issues affect our work with Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican diaspora, especially in the southern states that we work in so much in right now. So I urge you to please do that. They're going to go on for some time. There'll be instructions about how to do it and hop around. And you can actually go into different rooms. But I urge you to please do so, ask questions of our staff, and do everything possible to learn more about our plans for 2021 with the staff in each one of our pillars. Thank you so much.